When you think about it, supergroups are rarely as good as we hope. I mean, if you ignore a myriad of factors, like I do, then it should be a simple thing. You're putting together a group of people already established as talented and creative musicians. So great musician plus great musician plus great musician equals whatever great times 3 is. Amazing, spectacular, something like that. But this, sadly, isn't how we think of most of these bands. Usually it's just 1 or 2 good or good-ish albums, maybe a few great songs between them, and otherwise the project comes and goes without much staying power, as eyes inevitably just turn back to what those people were all working on beforehand. Like, you don't hear many people still talking about Audio Slave, or Velvet Revolver, or Zwan, or any of these. And exceptions exist, of course. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, Yellow Magic Orchestra, Cream, I know. And Zeppelin barely qualifies, so I'm not even thinking of them. But my point is that you would think the great ones wouldn't be the exceptions. It would be the not-so-great ones. When we think of a supergroup, it's not, with our powers combined, we can create good. No, it's, with our powers combined, we can create something really goddamn cool. Which is very arguably unfair to let this ultimately arbitrary term lock that immediate expectation onto a group by default. Because regardless of what musicians are there, in a way every band still starts at 0 and has to figure themselves out. But fair or not, it creates this high bar that's tough to surpass. Especially in the rock world, I do like that Blind Faith album a lot. But still, overall, there's not many, for one reason or another, that succeed at that and become greater than the sum of their parts. But to contrast them, if you look down south, no, more south, keep going, and stop. Here, there's one particular band that somehow avoids every single one of those hurdles to reach pretty much all that you could wish for from a supergroup and then some. That band being... Disclaimer, look, I took middle school Spanish just like everyone else, but apparently there's more to the language beyond that, so don't go expecting perfect pronunciation here. In some cases, I may just say the English translation too. I don't need to maximize my screw-ups, so go easy on me, please. I'm trying my best. Seru, Girán. Often dubbed the Argentinian Beatles, not really in terms of sound or style, but for their popularity, notability, and song quality, they had an extremely strong and consistent career through the 70s and 80s, and one reunion album in the 90s, which that one's good too, while representing a very key period of Argentina's history, with their legacy lasting long beyond it. And their story all begins with this guy, Charly Garcia. And to get it out of the way, yes, his facial hair is really like that. He has vitiligo, which you notice more when it affects skin, but sometimes it can just affect hair, and so that's why his mustache is so awesome. Anyways, he was a musical prodigy from a young age, since his ear apparently has absolute pitch, and he could have easily gone the path of a music theory teacher with his knowledge of and preference for classical music, and specifically the piano. But once British rock exploded in the 60s, he started playing in bands and soon formed the group Sui Generis with many people, but the only stable partner being Nito Mestre. Predominantly a folk duo, a little Simon and Garfunkel-esque, but with a more youthful, earnest energy to the songs that earned them immense popularity very quickly, particularly with young fans. From the very first record though, there was always a little more range beyond folk, with some blues or rock, and with each album following that, the scale, amount of layers, and experimentation to the rock side of their sound kept growing, eventually to a conceptual, prog-rocky point with their third and an unreleased fourth record that didn't match as well with what fans hoped for from the group. So Charly wanting to continue in his own direction there was the seed that became the dissolution of Sui Generis, as they played their farewell concert in 1976 to what, at that point, was the largest recorded audience to an Argentinian artist. So Charly's next venture was to have a band more actively capture the sound in his head that combines this sort of 70s Genesis-esque prog rock, his love for the piano and synthesizer, pieces of Latin influence from artists like Milton Nascimento, and his knowledge of classical songwriting. Essentially something that I would think of as another area of progressive rock, but I kept seeing it referred to as specifically symphonic rock, which I assume must be a more specifically South American musical term, because I hadn't heard that genre name before, but it does do a better job illustrating a lot of what Charly goes for. So with that in mind, he created Seru here. Oh, wait, no, he had a different supergroup first. So, I'll try this once. La Máquina de Hacer Pájaros, which means the bird-making machine. They were attempt number 1. With that group, the general audience was still hoping for Charly to return to the early Sui Generis sound, and thus a little resistant to it and sometimes confused by his new direction. I mean, like, they had 2 keyboardists. People don't know what to make of that. What are you doing with 2 keyboards? How many keys is that? So with limited headway made and heavy tension between the band members, they split up after 2 records, both of which are pretty good though. After that, in 1977, right back at square one with nobody, Charly set off once more to put together a new group. But this time, he wasn't looking for just any new band. What he needed was the greatest band. But Weezer wasn't available, so instead he eyed David Lebón, a guy who had bounced around and made an impact in numerous bands from the Argentina rock scene, such as playing bass for Papos Blues, guitar and bass for Pescado Rabioso, guitar for Billy Bond, drums briefly for Color Humano, his solo records where he sings and plays most of the instruments, and he did a lot of stuff, okay? Him and Charly had known each other and made guest appearances on some of each other's prior projects, so they were already friends and fit together well. Charly went and told him, "Hey, start a band with me." David said, "No, I'm busy." Charly asked again. David said no. Charly asked a third time, and David said, "Okay." From there, try as he might, David Lebón wasn't fast enough to play all the instruments at the same time. So instead he would just be the guitarist, and him and Charly would go seek out 2 more members to complete the band. Those 2 members being Oscar Moreau, famous drummer for Los Gatos, a very notable band to early Argentina rock, plus was also the drummer for Charly's prior group. And on bass, they pulled in the 18-year-old Pedro Aznar, who despite being so young, had already played in and been sought after for many local bands. Regardless of the resume though, Charly and David just happened to witness a show he was playing in, and were impressed enough to know they had to have him join what would become Serú Girán. And from the jump, it doesn't take long for them to take that setup of 4 well-respected musicians uniting and easily differentiate themselves from a majority of that pack. The first obvious point being that once Serú Girán was formed, this was the band for them. This group was absolutely their main priority, whereas for a lot of others, something like this ends up as a side project, a 1-album victory lap for all the members, or just something for them to have fun with. Here, no. All these guys still had something to prove, and despite their strong histories, those steps forward weren't going to be handed to them by default, as shown clearly by the initial reaction to their debut album. Released quickly in 1978, it unapologetically reaches further towards an expanded symphonic rock style, and upon hearing these songs performed live, the press's distaste would go as far as the famous line, "These are not the 4 Serú Girán, but some doubles who played for them." None of which was helped by the fact that in their first year, they were pressured to not present themselves as Serú Girán, but instead Charly Garcia and Serú Girán, which just baits any audience more into expecting Sui Generis 2.0, which this completely new band very much is not. Though the self-titled album does at least ease you into that change a little bit with the first track, which has Charly on piano, starting it off only accompanied by an acoustic guitar and string arrangement, so something more akin to what people were used to from Sui Generis. Eventually the whole band comes in, with Charly's synth replacing what the strings were doing and lifting everything else up. But for the final section, the strings come back and all the pieces come together to show what a lot of this record is aiming for. So as an introduction, in addition to just being a strong song on its own, it offers a clear dissection of the sound that they're aiming for, which is something I kind of view as an active combination of musical past, present, and future. From the past, there's Charly's classical influence with the orchestra and unique song structures and how often they want to continuously move forward and evolve rather than loop back around in a verse-chorus layout. The present is represented by the core rock aspects that are inspired by Genesis but a bit stronger melodically. And what ties to the future, I think, is Charly's heavy use of synthesizers, which had been around for a while and used in notable songs, but it wasn't until a few years later in the 80s that it became extremely popular and people were using it as often as Charly does. He was ahead of the pack, being all in on stuff like that. Synthesizers, Moogs, electric pianos, like he has 4 of them stacked on top of each other. He was all in. So the rest of the album continues with that fusion while also spotlighting what each of the members bring to the table. Charly has this general layered musical complexity and unique song structures. Lebón has such impressive range with the guitar. He can seamlessly blend in with a symphony, pull out a killer blues riff, or the final track, which is the only one written solely by Lebón, is basically this continuous, light Halloween-ass metal riff. Like, no matter where the band ended up going from here, he'd be able to make it work. And the bass, like, my god. Look, I don't know a lot about the bass, but Pedro Aznar, he's possibly the quickest a bassist has ever stood out to me. The sound isn't buried at all, it's a very easy notice towards the front of the mix, and the bass has this kind of funk tone to it, but the way he plays with it is more smooth and free, bringing in a more jazz fusion layer to their sound, and adapting it well to what any song demands of him. Voy a Mil is probably the track here that keeps him the busiest, and he pulls it off no problem. Definitely arguable that instrumentally, Aznar is the most valuable piece to the band, which is saying something given who the other members are. Like, I hadn't even mentioned yet how great that drum track to Cars, Jets, Planes, Boats is. Crazy good. And an especially notable piece to the record is that, with most of the lyrics to the title track, plus the title of that and a few other songs, you may think, well, this is in Spanish, I don't understand any of this. But you'd be wrong. You don't understand any of it because it's not even a real language. Which, to explain why the hell any band would do that, we need some background on that specific time in Argentina and how Serú Girán connects to it. Going with the short version of it because, I'm not a world history channel, so with every word I say on this, it just ups my chances of screwing up. So this guy, Juan Perón, he's the president of Argentina, but then, whoops, he's really old and dies. So his vice president, Isabel Perón, who was also his wife apparently, takes over in 1974. And between then and 1976, a lot of conflicts that had already been bubbling in the country ended up bursting with the result of a military coup, bringing into power a right-wing dictatorship for the next 8-ish years. And under that dictatorship, there was this thing called the Dirty War, which is described as a battle against a hidden enemy, meaning that they aren't just out to repress people like left-wing terrorists who are actively threatening the dictatorship through violence, but also just anyone who is taking part in or spreading beliefs that do not perfectly match with the government's Christian ideals. So gay people, activists, writers, and of course musicians. Censorship was a very real thing to be concerned about by bands. If you're too direct or obvious with your criticisms, at best maybe your music just isn't released or advertised to many people, but at worst, who knows? I mean, even before the coup happened, the third Sui Generis record was originally more political, but they held back a little bit over worries like that. So now, being in the midst of it, Seru Girán went with a loophole in creating and using this fake language, which they provide some clues to, placed on record sleeves and stuff, but leave a lot for interpretation. And I'm not saying that's the ideal way to work around it. After all, it is noted to be, in addition to the general resistance to their musical style, another reason why people didn't connect with the album. But it's still really cool. Making up words that sound like real words and flow well is actually tough. We all tried to make our own language in 8th grade only to quickly give up, and I haven't tried it again recently, but I assume it's still difficult. So I like that they did that for those couple songs and the band's own name. Neat workaround that doesn't hinder their actual sound when used. With later albums, they'll ditch it, and instead, on the third album, Bicicleta, go a much more traditional songwriter route of dressing up their perspective in a metaphor, like comparing the disillusionment with Argentina to the story of Alice in Wonderland. Where on their second record, La Grasa de las Capitales, they'll point at more general societal issues. And the point of highlighting that here is firstly to present the band's connection to the country's history with some level of their importance and what they represented beyond just making cool music. And the second thing is, it's the making cool music part. That made-up language is just such a weird, creative, new thing. There's barely any area of this album where the guys are just doing what they already were doing before this started. That's another thing that I think is pretty rare when all the members already have their established sound. For example, Them Crooked Vultures, with Josh Homme, Dave Grohl, and John Paul Jones. It's a good record, I like it a lot, but Josh Homme's swagger-filled stoner rock that he's already known for dominates it, and keeps it more as an offshoot of Queens of the Stone Age rather than its own fully individual thing. Cases like that are fairly common. But this first Seru Girán record doesn't sound like anyone but Seru Girán, and that's a big part of why I love it. While not their most refined album, it's definitely their most ambitious. As with future releases, after the general audience still was not connecting with what they were going for, if not outright disliking it, the band scales that experimentation back a little. The result, whether due to that, the punchier melodies, or just people having more time to accept that this isn't Sui Generis 2.0, being them finally winning over the crowd with that second record. Though when I say they lessened the weirdness a little, it'll be quickly apparent that yes, that really does mean just a little. They don't have an orchestra backing them on some tracks anymore, they completely ditched the fake language thing, and has higher peaks of energy here, but they still inexplicably break into a quick disco parody towards the end of the first track. They're still just doing whatever they want to do, and it's to great effect. The first track bursts in with these closely knit rhythms that tighten up more and more until it has to fire off and explode. In addition to the disco part, I especially like the backing vocals in the last chorus. Pulling off doo-doos and la-las isn't as easy as you'd think, so credit there. St. Francis and the Wolf, despite being sung by Le Bon, might be their most sui generis-esque song. Modulated Frequency is smooth as hell. Friday 3 AM and Dog Night is a pretty devastating 1-2 punch. I'd say be careful when you listen to those, in a good way. Could go on about each song here. While I might prefer the debut over anything else, I can see how this was the breakthrough, and just the same with how their third record continued that and is most commonly stated to be their best release. More mature political commentary, has some of those tighter, melody-focused moments, but also not afraid to take a step or two towards the direction of the first record, like having the first song be the longest track in their discography. Through all those records, you can see that most crucially, the band just gels together extremely well. The music has moments once in a while for them to show off solo, but it's never a battle to see who can flex their chops the most. For as much as these guys surely have egos, especially Charly, who's quite eccentric to say the least. I mean, he once jumped into a pool from who knows what floor of a hotel for seemingly no reason, so a bit too much confidence, I'd say. But despite that, they're always playing to serve the song and the band rather than just themselves. Like, yeah, Oscar Moreau lets you know that he can do an absurdly tight, fast, ricocheting drum beat, or sporadically jump between different intense rhythms, but he's sure as hell not doing that all the time. And even when he has the spotlight, he's still only gonna play what fits. Like the song Dog Night has these notable drum fill flourishes, but in addition to just being impressive playing, the hits have this patience and gravitas that matches and adds to the dark, melancholic tone of that song. Same with Le Bon. He knows when to leave space in a song and not overplay, and I actually think some of his strongest moments, rather than an in-your-face electric guitar solo, are when he has a more subdued acoustic part. But even more so than the musicianship, what shows them serving the songs above all is the interplay between Charly and David as the two lead songwriters and vocalists. Generally, when you have multiple songwriters and singers, the rule is that whoever wrote the song gets to sing lead on it. The Beatles generally did that, CSNY, the Drive-By Truckers, etc. And generally that is the case here, with also the songs they wrote together usually being sung by Le Bon. But you can see that with a few of the songs credited to just Charly, David Le Bon is the only singer on it, which is so interesting to me. I feel like you rarely see someone who could sing their own song instead hand it off to the other singer-songwriter in the band. Besides, like, the Beatles handing some songs off to Ringo. But Ringo rarely wrote his own songs anyways, so it's still a very different dynamic. Like George wasn't handing his songs off to Paul or John, or vice versa. And with Charly, he wasn't just leaving Le Bon the scraps either. They're all strong songs. Cars, Jets, Planes, Boats is my favorite one off their debut, and Seminaire is seemingly their most popular song by far. So it feels more like they actively thought about whose voice better fits a given song, because they aren't interchangeable. Charly's voice, to me, and I have looked at some translated lyrics, but mostly just from listening, he always comes off as more of a narrator, while Le Bon's voice is a bit more tender and can hold this soulful emotionality that Charly doesn't have as much. The track How Much Longer Will It Take, one of Le Bon's songs, displays that well as he desperately repeats that title, questioning and echoing it into the void. On vocal delivery alone, it's possibly the most emotionally affecting moment of their discography, and guess that's edging out Friday 3 AM. But with moments like that, I can see how, despite only one song on the first record being penned solely by Le Bon, he sang on more of the record than Charly. It's the same with the co-written songs, not feeling the need to have them trade vocal sections or harmonize if it doesn't fit, something that even CSNY at their weaker points succumb to forcing in. Here, they all use and share their tools well, and make it so when you listen to the record, you aren't dividing them up like, these are the Charly songs, these are the Le Bon songs, and here are the rare Pedro Aznar songs. No, they're all just Seru Girán songs. And that can be a very difficult thing to manage and succeed with. Whether it's because each of those songwriter entities in a band feel too separate from each other, or in trying to blend those pieces together, they each just end up feeling neutered and losing part of their individual spark to fit together. Like with the Wilburys a bit, or I know they're really popular right now, but Boy Genius too. Like, I love Julian Baker, really like Phoebe Bridgers, and I like Lucy Dacus, but they don't all come together to make each other stronger. And that's the piece that separates Serú Girán from so many others, and lets them eventually surpass the projects that made these guys famous in the first place. They were so huge at this point that they were among the bands the dictator of Argentina sent spokesmen to, trying to get into their ear and use them as a tool to influence citizens, which obviously didn't work given their usual commentary is still present on next year's Peperina, which is a bit softer or more ballady of an album that holds down the fort of their discography, bringing them further up into their peak popularity and locking down their initial run of 4 great records in 4 years, a streak the level of which is very rare, but had to end eventually with Pedro Aznar soon leaving to both study music at Berkeley and play bass in the Pat Metheny group. And the group not continuing there is, in one way, an especially big shame, because at that point, they had essentially reached the top of Argentina, so were just then prepping to expand their reach to Europe and hopefully start to gain a more worldwide audience. They even had English versions of a few songs prepared, the only one of which I think has been released as Peperina. So with even just a few more years, the band could have earned a lot more of the recognition they deserve outside their own language. But at the same time, if it's not the 4 of them, that's probably not Serú Girán. The other members had a few conversations about potentially replacing Pedro, but they couldn't settle on anything and decided to just do that final tour and split up instead. It's best that they only reunited when all 4 of them could and wanted to. I mean, I even said earlier that in terms of how they all use their instruments in the band, Pedro may be the most standout, distinct, and obviously irreplaceable one, so makes sense. Replacing one of them might just be starting at 0 again. The whole band would have to reshape in a way. Whereas similar groups jam together these members as fully formed individual pieces, Charly, David, Pedro, and Oscar all use their skills to become one new piece. They stand out within Argentina, they stand out among progressive rock groups, they stand out among supergroups, and they should stand out among the entire world. Because while they might be called the Argentinian Beatles, I still haven't seen an English Serú Girán.